The Animal Alliance of Canada is an animal welfare organization based in Toronto. They've been in the media a fair bit over the last few weeks over a report that they just released that's calling for the end of the Manitoba spring black bear hunt. The Animal Alliance of Canada was involved back in the 90s in the Ontario spring black bear hunting ban. And that's where they claim thousands of black bear cubs are being orphaned by hunters each year in Ontario's spring hunt. Later, that turned out to be a claim that was debunked by Ontario biologists. This new report from the Animal Alliance of Canada looks very technical, very scientific, and at the surface, it seems to be a very credible document. And what maybe they didn't expect is someone like me was going to dig into the details and verify their reference sources. At a high level, the literature sources that the Animal Alliance of Canada cites don't all say the things that they claim that they do. And in some cases, the reference sources that they chose actually contradict the argument that's put forth by the Animal Alliance of Canada. So the main argument they present here in Manitoba is exactly the same thing that they presented in Ontario. Hunters orphan cubs every year because hunting is held in the spring of the year. The Animal Alliance of Canada claims that in Manitoba in the spring of 2023, hunters orphaned 224 cubs. And according to the Alliance, those cubs were sentenced to a cruel and completely avoidable death. Let's take a step back here for a second. There are quite a few reasons why cubs can be orphaned. The mother can be killed by another bear, a car, a train, by conservation officers in a conflict situation, or by some sort of natural accident. And sows could die naturally because of poor health after they emerge from the den with their cubs, leaving the cubs orphaned. So what the Animal Alliance of Canada did to come up with the number of orphaned cubs in Manitoba is they looked at studies and they looked at the percentage of bears that are females with cubs. Then they looked at studies of what the average litter size was of a female that had cubs. Then they applied these assumptions to the estimate of the female black bears that were harvested in Manitoba in the spring of 2023. And they came up with this number of 224 orphaned cubs. What they didn't do when they looked at the female portion of the harvest was to screen out the females below the reproductive age. Black bears first reproduce at about age 6. So bears that are harvested that are 3, 4, or 5 won't be of reproductive maturity. So they can be taken out of the data set. Sows can also be without cubs for many reasons. Even if a female black bear has signs of lactation or scientists can tell that they have implantation scars on their uteri, doesn't mean that the female that was harvested had cubs. Cubs can die in the den after or during birth. Sometimes the sows will abandon their own cubs shortly after emerging from the den because they think something's wrong with the cub or that she's stressed and may not be in good physiological condition, so she'll abandon her cubs to preserve her own survival. Especially in a spring where finding food is particularly tough for a sow that has to produce milk. She will preserve her life over that of her offspring. Cubs can die of diseases, injuries, accidents. Sow black bears are on a 2-year reproductive cycle, so it doesn't mean that every year a female bear of breeding age is going to necessarily have cubs with her. In one study that I read, the scientists reported that the solitary females are most often the ones that hunters harvest during a spring hunt. So the 224 orphaned cubs that the Animal Alliance of Canada claimed were orphaned by hunters is simply a hypothetical number. To support its argument to ban spring black bear hunting in Manitoba, the Animal Alliance of Canada relied on a scientific paper authored by a scientist whose last name is Rishtechno. The Rishtechno paper, I find, is kind of ironic that the Animal Alliance of Canada used this in their report, because that study was actually published in direct response to Manitoba animal rights groups who were contending that hundreds of bears were orphaned every year in the spring black bear hunt. The Rishtechno paper was a peer-reviewed research study that was published in the scientific journals. That paper used a mathematical model and real data that scientists extracted from the uteri of harvested female black bears that determined whether or not the black bear had been impregnated and had cubs that year or the previous year. The scientists' model predicted that hunters could orphan about 41 cubs per spring in Manitoba. The scientists said 41 cubs is less than 2% of natural cub mortality. So that number, 41 orphan cubs, is a theoretical number that was derived by a mathematical model. It's interesting because in all the different sources that the Animal Alliance of Canada cite in this report, when they actually cited a peer-reviewed scientific paper, they actually said it was biased and it underestimated the actual number of cubs. So they couldn't actually accept the conclusions of a scientific peer-reviewed study because it went against the numbers of cubs that they believed were being orphaned by hunters. Now, the other main thrust in this paper that the Animal Alliance of Canada uses to argue banning spring black bear hunting in Manitoba is this concept that female black bears stash their cubs. Hunters can't tell the difference between a female and a male bear. They see a lone bear, and so they shoot a cub-bearing female black bear because the cubs have been stashed. One of the sources that they cited to support this argument was actually a global news story about an emaciated black bear cub that was found in Alberta. And that just makes no sense to me. They also relied heavily on the Beck paper to support their arguments that sows stash their cubs and hunters unknowingly shoot cub-bearing sows. It's a very, very old, from the 90s, anecdotal report of a group of wildlife biologists in the United States that sat around a round table and presented their opinions of black bears, black bear hunting, and spring hunting, and they also discussed some of the pros and cons and perceptions around black bear hunting in society. So the Beck paper kind of had a section of positive things about spring black bear hunting and negative things about black bear hunting. But again, it was just a round table of people discussing topics and ideas and presenting their opinions. So what the Animal Alliance of Canada did, they selected some of the negative comments around this notion of cub stashing and then presented it as if it was some kind of scientific truth that they cited out of a scientific study. Animal welfare, animal rights, and hunting as a sustainable use are based on different personal philosophies. And I can honestly say neither philosophy is right or wrong. It's just what you believe. I think animal welfare and animal rights folks are idealists. Their definition of a humane practice is that nothing bad ever happens. There's zero risk and zero harm. I'll generalize and say that I think hunters are realists, and they accept that they and wildlife managers do everything that they can to minimize risk and minimize harm to wildlife. Animal welfare, animal rights people, I think their focus is on the individual animal. Hunters, I think, while they care about individual animals as well, they also tend to step back and look at the big picture. Is the population okay? And is hunting pressure sustainable for the species as a whole? Black bear cubs can be orphaned as a result of hunting. I won't say that it doesn't happen, but my experience in black bear hunting and my experience observing how other hunters hunt black bears and the diligence that they take, as well as looking at some of the scientific studies, I think the risk of cubs being orphaned as a result of hunting in the spring is very, very low. So the title of the Animal Alliance's report asks this question: is Manitoba's spring black bear hunt ecologically responsible? The definition of ecologically responsible is the practice sustainable, meaning that the practice is not overwhelming nature's ability to replenish itself. Black bears in Canada are not a conservation concern. To this day, they still occupy 95% of their historical range in Canada. Black bear populations are doing well across Canada thanks to hunters who helped bring about the end of market hunting in the early 1900s, who helped elevate the status of a black bear from vermin to that of a game animal who is to be managed using scientific and conservation principles through regulated hunting. Manitoba is an exemplary example of the Canadian success story of black bear conservation. So yes, in my opinion, the Manitoba spring black bear hunt is ecologically responsible. The Animal Alliance, in their title, also ask, is the Manitoba spring black bear hunt a humane practice? The legal definition of a humane practice is that the practice avoids or minimizes pain, stress, or suffering or distress of wild animals, and that the practice takes into consideration the welfare of the animals. Spring black bear hunting incorporates all of these factors of a humane practice. So, as far as I'm concerned, case closed in Manitoba.